It is the middle of July. Nobody is in that garden. No one is hauling mulch, pulling weeds from the paths, or adding anything from a bag. 8 specific plants are covering the ground, running pest control, holding moisture, and feeding the biology below, while the person who planted them is somewhere else. The answer is 8 living mulch plants, started in the right spots, that take over the work your garden still needs done. Some reseed, some spread, some come back year after year. They suppress weeds, hold moisture, feed the soil system below the surface, and one of them pulls nutrients from 6 feet underground and brings them back to your root zone. 8 of them. The order in this countdown is deliberate. The higher the number, the faster it acts. The lower the number, the deeper it reaches, and the longer it stays. Before we start at number 8, drop a comment. Have you ever grown a plant specifically to cover and improve your soil, rather than to harvest from it? That question may look very different by the time we reach number 1. Number 8. Buckwheat. Unlocks phosphorus in 6 weeks. Most cover crops take a full season to accomplish anything measurable. Buckwheat closes a bare bed in 6 weeks. 6 weeks from seed to full canopy coverage. That window matters because the problem buckwheat addresses is time-sensitive. Bare soil left open in summer is not resting ground. Between late June and August, a bed without cover is an open invitation. Weeds do not wait. Your garden soil is not empty. The top 6 inches of a typical garden bed hold somewhere between 10,000 and 50,000 viable weed seeds per square meter dormant, waiting for light. The moment you clear a crop and leave that ground exposed, those seeds start receiving the signal they need. Buckwheat races to cover the surface before they can establish. Gaps in your seeding are gaps where the weed seed bank takes over. When you chop buckwheat at the end of its cycle and leave the residue on the surface, it decomposes without locking up nitrogen the way woody material does. The carbon-to-nitrogen ratio runs around 20:1, close enough to the ideal range that the breakdown is clean. Earthworms begin moving toward the surface within 3 to 4 weeks to feed on the decaying layer. The organic matter that develops underneath is dark and loose, what most guides never mention. While buckwheat is growing, its roots release oxalic acid into the surrounding soil. That acid converts phosphorus that is chemically bound to soil particles into a form plant roots can actually absorb. Your soil test may show adequate phosphorus in a given bed, and the plants you grow there may still show deficiency, because the phosphorus present is locked in a form that is inaccessible. Buckwheat shifts the chemistry of that zone. After the plant is incorporated, the unlocked phosphorus remains available for whatever you plant there next. The residual effect on weeds also outlasts the plant itself. Roots and decomposing tissue release compounds, including phagopyrin and rutin derivatives, that suppress weed seed germination in the surrounding soil. Research has documented measurable reductions in weed emergence in beds where buckwheat was grown and chopped, even after the buckwheat is completely gone. Sow it thick. Thin coverage leaves the kind of gaps that undermine the whole purpose. Dense seeding is not a preference. It is the condition under which buckwheat wins the race against the existing seed bank in your soil. Scatter it thick. Rake it in. 6 weeks later, chop it down. That is the entire protocol. Number 7. Sweet Alyssum, pest control while covering soil. Walk past a bed of Sweet Alyssum, and you are probably thinking about the smell. The aphids on your vegetables are thinking about it too, and not for the same reason. Alyssum gets planted for looks. Most people leave the assessment there. The mat it forms, 6 to 8 inches tall, spreading wide and sitting low against the soil, covers the ground, closely enough to cut off the light that weed seeds below it need to germinate. That alone justifies a spot on this list. Adult hoverflies are drawn to Alyssum flowers consistently and in large numbers. The visible part is the insects. The part that changes your garden is their larvae. Hoverfly larvae are predatory, and their diet is aphids, thrips, and soft-bodied insects. A healthy population of adults near your alyssum means a steady patrol of larvae moving through the surrounding beds, working without any direction from you. What most guides never mention, alyssum tissue is almost entirely leaf material, with very little structural stem. When the plant dies back or is cut, that tissue decomposes in a matter of weeks and adds nitrogen-rich organic matter directly into the top inch of soil. The next generation is already germinating from seed the plant dropped before the season ends. Plant it along the front edge of your beds and between taller crops. The roots are shallow and fibrous, no competition with what is already in the ground. In prolonged heat, it slows down, but recovers once temperatures fall. Front edges, scatter once, done. Number 6. Nasturtium, trap crop that feeds you. Nasturtium has the cheerful reputation of a flower and the serious job description of a biological security system. The leaves are peltate, shield-shaped, mounted on a stem at the center rather than the edge, and angled to cover as much horizontal ground as possible. In a heavy downpour, those leaves intercept water before it strikes bare soil below, slowing the impact that causes compaction and surface erosion. Ground under a nasturtium planting stays loose after rain in a way that exposed soil does not. The roots release glucosinolate compounds into the surrounding soil, the same chemical family found in mustard plants. Glucosinolates have a documented suppressive effect on certain soil-borne fungal pathogens. The plant is actively altering the soil chemistry around its root zone in a direction that reduces disease pressure on neighboring plants. Nasturtium draws aphids to itself in strong preference to the vegetables growing nearby. That concentration is useful. When sections of the plant are heavily infested, you trim them away, and the rest continues growing without interruption. Aphid pressure on your food crops drops. Nothing needs to be applied to the plants you are going to eat. What most guides never mention, the entire plant is edible. The leaves are sharp and peppery, close to watercress in flavor, and interchangeable in salads. The flowers are used as garnish. The seeds, picked green and pickled in brine, develop a texture and intensity that substitutes directly for capers in cooking. Seeds overwinter in the soil and come back the following spring without being replanted, so directly. Nasturtium does not recover from root disturbance. 1 inch deep, watered in. Number 5. Creeping Thyme changes soil chemistry while growing. This is the only plant on this list that actively gets stronger every time you step on it. Creeping Thyme is a woody perennial ground cover, the only plant here built to hold up under foot traffic without thinning out. That is a practical distinction. It is why creeping thyme belongs in pathways between beds and between stepping stones, spots where anything else would deteriorate within a season of regular use. The leaves produce thymol and carvacrol aromatic oils, released continuously from the plant, and at higher concentrations when the leaves are crushed or warmed by sun. These oils have documented allelopathic activity, preventing competing seeds in the surrounding soil from gaining a foothold. The suppression is chemical, not physical. Bark chips and straw work by blocking light. Creeping thyme changes the conditions that seeds need in order to activate. Those are different jobs, and the thyme version runs as long as the plant is alive. Under a mature creeping thyme mat, soil moisture retention is comparable to a 2-inch layer of wood chips achieved, while the plant is actively growing, not from a static material sitting on the surface. As older stems die back at the base, they contribute carbon to the soil in a slow, continuous process rather than in a single seasonal application. What most guides leave out. The first growing season is where most people abandon creeping thyme. The plant is not struggling. It is directing resources underground before it spreads above. Root establishment comes before surface coverage. Plan for a full season with visible space between plants, which means weeding consistently around the plugs until the mat closes. Plant in full sunshade thins the mat and reduces the chemical suppression effect. Space plants 12 inches apart. On slopes, use stem cuttings pressed into soil rather than seeded starts. Once the mat is established, you can trim sections for kitchen use, while the rest continues to cover the ground. Number 4. White Clover, your lawn's free nitrogen engine. You probably already have white clover in your yard. you have been pulling it out. Trifolium repens is the most familiar plant on this countdown and almost certainly the most misread. It grows across every state in the U.S. Most gardeners treat it as an intruder to remove rather than a resource to position correctly. Rhizobium bacteria colonize the root system and form nodules, small structures, where atmospheric nitrogen is pulled out of the air and converted into a form roots can absorb. A mature clover stand can fix between 100 and 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. In a home garden, a clover path running alongside a vegetable bed can supply a meaningful portion of the adjacent crop's needs with nothing added. The part that most garden content skips. Nitrogen fixation is not what makes white clover useful as a ground cover. That story belongs to the stolon. White clover grows to between 4 and 8 inches, then stops adding height. It redirects energy into horizontal spread through stolons, creeping stems that root at the nodes and push outward. A mature mat is dense enough that any seed landing on its surface makes no contact with bare soil. There is no entry point. The suppression is not about blocking light. It is about eliminating the surface where establishment begins. Moisture under a clover mat compares to a 2 to 3 inch straw layer while the plant is still living. White clover arrived in North America from Europe in the 17th century and is now naturalized in all 50 states according to USDA and RCS records. That same persistence means it can crowd out other low-growing plants when the mat gets dense. Set physical edge barriers, rigid material pressed into the soil between clover and vegetable beds. Better placements are under fruit trees, along permanent paths, and between tall crops like corn or tomatoes, where the clover adds nitrogen to the root zone above while covering the soil below. Trim it periodically to push more lateral spread. The clippings fall back to the surface and break apart fast, returning what the plant has fixed back into the bed. That is where we land at number 4. The first 4 plants in this list are all doing versions of the same work covering soil, holding moisture, feeding the surface. What comes next is different. The last 3 do not just sit on top of your soil. They change what the soil below them is capable of. Most guides stop at this point. The results that shift over time are in the last 3. Number 3. Yarrow, native that rewires pest control. Every plant in this list so far was introduced to North America from somewhere else. Yarrow was already here. Achillea millefolium is native across much of North America. It does not carry the uncertainty that comes with bringing in a species from outside its native range. The insects, soil organisms, and competing plants that keep it in check are already present in the surrounding environment. It grows reliably across hardiness zones 3 through 9 and spreads through both rhizome division and seed dropped at the end of the season, requiring no irrigation once the roots are established. The root system goes 2 to 3 feet down, unusually deep for a plant this size. Those roots break into compacted ground and open drainage paths. When they die back, the channels they leave remain, improving how water moves downward without any surface disruption. The flowers are flat and open, not a tube or a deep cup, but a platform which makes the nectar accessible to insects that cannot reach into more complex blooms. That includes short-tongued bees and, more significantly for your beds, predatory and parasitic wasps. Parasitic wasps lay their eggs inside caterpillars and aphid colonies. The larvae that develop inside kill the host. For the adult wasps to stay in an area, they need a reliable nectar source nearby. Yarrow is one of the most consistently cited plants for this in integrated pest management research. The part that most descriptions miss: yarrow does not attract pollinators. It attracts the insects that prey on your worst pests. That is a different function, and a more useful one for a vegetable garden. Drought-tolerant once rooted. No irrigation needed after the first growing season. Number 2. Borage. Mineral pump you can eat. Borage looks like it belongs in a cottage garden. It acts like it belongs in a soil chemistry lab. Borage officinalis is technically an annual, but it reseeds from dropped seed with enough consistency. but it behaves like a permanent fixture from one season to the next. The flowers are small blue stars, a shape that bumblebees show a strong preference for over most other flowering plants in the garden, based on apiculture research comparing foraging patterns. The taproot reaches down roughly 12 inches, pulling potassium, calcium, and silicon from soil below the reach of most vegetable roots. When the plant dies and breaks down where it fell, those minerals move up into the surface zone. Nothing needs to be moved or processed. The plant deposits what it gathered from below directly where the next crop's roots will be. The leaves are soft and low in structural fiber, high in the kind of material that breaks apart quickly. Cut them or let them die back, and within 3 weeks on the soil surface, they are nearly gone. The organic matter underneath is measurable, darker, finer, and noticeably different from the surrounding soil within a month. Field trials have recorded specific results. Borage growing near tomatoes reduces tomato hornworm pressure on the crop. And borage planted under strawberry rows produced yield increases in repeated trials. These are outcomes from repeated field research, not estimates. What most seed catalogs don't mention: the flowers are edible, added directly to salads or used as garnish. And the seeds, when cold-pressed, produce an oil high in gamma-linolenic acid, designated GLA in nutritional research. USDA plant records classify borage as both ornamental and functional. Both designations are accurate. Sow directly into the soil. Once it takes hold, it fills nearby open ground on its own. Do not move it after the taproot sets. Number 1. Comfrey beats manure from 6 feet. Every other plant in this list works at the surface. Comfrey does not. Symphytum officinale sends a taproot 6 to 8 feet into loose soil. At that depth, it pulls potassium, calcium, phosphorus, iron, and silica from subsoil mineral reserves that no garden tool reaches and no other plant on this list can access. When you cut the leaves and lay them on the ground surface, those minerals transfer directly into the zone where your crop's roots are feeding. By dry weight, comfrey leaves contain more potassium than farmyard manure. That comparison was recorded in permaculture research starting in the 1970s specifically. The work of Lawrence Hills at the Henry Doubleday Research Association, now operating as Garden Organic, based in Brighton, UK. Potassium drives fruit development, root strength, and resistance to disease. A plant with comfrey leaves laid around its base is receiving something that most fertilizers sold in bags do not deliver in the same biological form. The leaves break down without any preparation. A substance called allantoin, present throughout the comfrey plant, accelerates microbial activity in the soil beneath the cut material. Within 1 to 2 weeks after laying the leaves on the ground, most of that material has broken down. Earthworm activity and microbial reproduction both increase measurably in the soil directly below. This is not just mineral input. Allantoin changes how quickly the soil can use what it receives. A mature plant can be cut 4 to 6 times per growing season. Each cut produces a large mass of leaves that wilt fast and are largely gone in 2 weeks. No shredding, no composting. Lay the leaves directly around fruit trees, along the edge of permanent vegetable beds, and leave them. In 2 weeks, the work is done, and the plant is already growing back. Comfrey is essentially permanent once planted. Even small root fragments left in the ground will regenerate, which is why location matters from the start. Bocking 14 is the variety developed specifically for high leaf production, and seed sterility. It spreads only through root division, not by self-seeding, so it stays where you place it. Source root crowns from a specialist grower rather than seed packets. One thing most online guides will not tell you: comfrey seed germinates poorly by its own nature. Growers with real experience start from root crowns or root divisions. Slow or failed germination from comfrey seed is not a technique error. It is how the plant works. Cut it. Lay the leaves down. Walk away. In 2 weeks, the soil has already changed. 8 plants. Here is how they fall across your calendar. Spring of year 1. Sow buckwheat into every gap between crops. 6 weeks later, those beds have reset. Alyssum and Nasturtium go in along the edges the same week. By midsummer, the pest population in those beds is already different. Fall. Creeping Thyme and White Clover go into the paths and perimeters. They will not close until spring, but the roots are working below the frost line. Year 2. Yarrow and Borage push through, Yarrow banking parasitic wasps. Borage drawing minerals up from a foot underground and returning them each time it dies back. And Comfrey, that plant you put in the ground in spring of year 1, is already on its 4th cut of the season, laying potassium directly over the root zones of every fruit tree on your property. By the 3rd season, you are not maintaining a garden. You are running one. The gardeners who work their soil and the gardeners whose soil works for them are separated by one decision made at planting time. 8 seeds. Subscribe. This is the kind of content this channel posts.